Welcome to the Laptop and Desktop Workgroup call on the 11th of June 2025. This is, I believe, our 7th call. Thank you for joining. A quick reminder for everyone who has not been with previous calls, and if you have not heard the message when I push the button, this session is being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, please mute yourself, turn off your camera, and you should not be in the recording. A quick repeat of the usual starting points in regards to the housekeeping. We want to follow the FreeBSD project's community code of conduct. In terms of this call, I think the most important parts are what are here, the bullet points. Generally, when people speak, please let people finish. Please let people make their points and finish their sentences and whatever points they want to make. If you want to say something, then please raise your virtual hand, and otherwise, please, if you want to say something while I'm speaking, then you're absolutely welcome to speak up while I'm speaking, because of the fact that sometimes I might be missing that you have your virtual hand up. Otherwise, please remember to use the virtual hand feature, particularly when others are speaking. In terms of the agenda, today is a bit of a special call or a special situation, slight deviation from the usual situation because of the fact that BSDCan is happening in parallel to this call. As a matter of fact, the tutorials are running basically, or have started today, if I remember correctly. That is why our colleagues from the FreeBSD Foundation are facing a bit of a challenge in joining today's call. That's why very likely I will be taking over in terms of the update for the Foundation's laptop project. I got some updates. As a matter of fact, everyone got an update from Alice just yesterday evening, I think, on the mailing list, and I will be sharing that status update also really quickly. And with that, we will launch directly into our usual starting points in terms of the minutes from the last call plus the governance aspects. There's a bit of update, but unfortunately not as much update as I was hoping for. Previously, the last time we had actually set up a call with Greg about the Enterprise Working Group and the overlap with this call. I'm jumping ahead here, but want to get this out of the way. Unfortunately, we had some other timing collision and we had to reschedule, but we are working out the kinks and we are still committed to meet, and we will meet. But unfortunately, the planned meeting did not materialize as we had hoped originally. But we will get there. So, in terms of the minutes, let me move over to this tab here. So, these are the minutes from our recent call from 14th of May, where basically, as I just stated, we had the intention of clarifying the overlaps between the Enterprise Working Group and the Laptop and Desktop Workgroup call. Unfortunately, we have not still have not resolved that, but we're working on it. There were multiple updates on the Foundations project, particularly for the March and April status updates, with a bunch of updates on wireless, graphics drivers, PKG base, particularly in terms of the integration into the installer, was really going forward and seeing some progress there. Some USB debugging and some process changes in terms of how we communicate status updates. Particularly, Alice has started to not just give us updates in terms of textual collections of what is happening during the project or during the periods that we are reporting on, but actually we have now roadmaps as sort of Gantt chart representations that also better understand the roadmap of what is happening in the project. And as a matter of fact, we'll be moving over there shortly because there's also been an update on this one. In terms of audio, Christos showed us his work, in particular a review that is on Fabricator, asking for feedback and asking for people to test. This should work on 14.2 as well as 15. This is a feature update in particular for making things work when people plug their headphone jacks into the computer, that things switch back and forth automatically. Yes, this feature was partially there already in the past, but very often people had to tweak things maybe even patch their own kernel to make this work, and this work should allow this to work more basically out of the box, as a matter of fact. As I already said, PKG Base, there was a forum post set up by Joe also asking for people to test and give feedback on PKG Base in terms of converting from a regular 14.2 system to PKG-based 15 system, as well as using the installers. Yes, we had Mark Phillips, the new guy from the foundation for marketing. He joined us and introduced himself. We had Lars present a list of KDE apps he had tested, and particular giving us an indication of various older apps that unfortunately do still compile but no longer actually start properly. And we finalized with the understanding that the survey we ran for the call dates unfortunately did not produce significant outcome in terms of whether we want to change, so we left the call dates as they were and as they still are. And that basically concludes the call from last time. If anybody has anything to add or wants to change anything, then please let me know. Otherwise, we will keep them as they are. They're open. They're also linked on the wiki. If you want to comment or add anything, then please feel free to do so, and I will follow up afterwards. As I mentioned, looking back, we generally had the usual suspect for action items to review what's going on for the FreeBSD Foundations project. We will now move to the update on the Laptop and Desktop Workgroup project from the FreeBSD Foundation. We usually start, and this is also kind of a repeat with every call to remind ourselves, okay, the idea of this project is to ensure that things work well out of the box for a specific set of hardware, but with the hopes to make this, work as broadly as possible. And with that, basically, I think we can move into the actual updates. There's been an update for April and May, which we can take a closer look at. I think April was actually also partially available also during the recent call already. As I mentioned, these updates here are actually a collection of items that have been completed or are underway. And some of those, I think, were also mentioned during the recent call because, as I said, April was, I think, already underway when we started with the recent call on May. And here we see the various updates around Wi-Fi. These are basically getting merged, is my understanding. And I think these are also important to keep in mind when we move to 14.3, which has recently been released, which also brought, I think, an important point. I'm not sure if it's mentioned here, but it was actually mentioned on the mailing list, and I also had that on the, I have this somewhere on the slides. I think we will come to that at a later point, that when we move to 14.3, we need to ensure that we also update the firmware, and that we do through the FWGet command. So we need to run that to ensure before we move to 14.3 or upgrade to 14.3, we need to run that to ensure that wireless works properly, because we now have all these new additions in 14.3 as well, is my understanding. But if I'm wrong or say something wrong, I think Björn is with us. Yes, Björn, please interrupt me if I'm saying something that is not correct. So, as I said, a bunch of improvements for Wi-Fi, particularly in terms of performance. There's work underway also for the MediaTek drivers. And in May, moving over here really quickly, there's again work underway with PKG Base, including that into the installer, making it work with the installer. So a plain vanilla installation in the future actually will produce a PKG-based system, and we're talking 15 here, obviously. Still on the way, wireless work, as you can see, still on the way, graphics work. The graphics work also does mean that there's a bunch of work, actually both graphics plus wireless means that there's also work on the way for the Linux KPI, and in particular the memory handling, as we can see here, power management. There's also work underway, and the USB debugging, and generally peripheral support here for USB is also getting improvements, as well as improvements around KDE, as we can see here. And I mentioned previously this review by Christos. This is the same that we also announced the last call, that basically allows improved audio connection handling when we plug devices into the audio check, that things are getting switched properly between the audio check and the internal audio. So this is also progressing nicely, including special key support. And we should probably add that this, I suppose this is focused on the defined computer models. I think this is at the moment the Framework 13 AMD series. That is the nominated reference model. And yes, there are other models, but this is the one that has been designated. Yes, please, Matthias, go ahead.
It looks like the Laptop 13 the current versions are being phased out. Do we have a way to get in touch with someone on the framework side that can help us understand what is their strategy? So their latest model is out of production, and it seems that it's not going to be there's not going to be new batches, and the other models they have are not or very incompletely compatible with FreeBSD. Especially they don't have any graphical interface. Long-term strategy and get some advanced warning about what they're doing.
Right. My understanding is there is an ongoing conversation between the FreeBSD Foundation as well as people at Framework. There's actually people also at Framework. I know at least of one particular person that does work closely also with the foundation to make things work. But understandably, it's only one person, so this is also not his sole focus, or let's say not his main work that he's doing at Framework. There's a bunch of other stuff also in relation to, if I remember correctly, Framework and firmware and well, basically non-operating system related work. But when you say that devices are not available, are you talking about the AMD in particular? Because I remember that, yes, the Intel models have been limited in terms of availability. Or have you seen the same thing happen for the AMDs?
As of yesterday.
Right. All right. Okay. That I did not realize. Okay. Well, that is a very good question. I will be happy to forward that to the context that we have, that basically the foundation have. I happen to know who it is, and I will be happy to share that question with him. I know that Framework also has a GitHub that they also use to communicate their compatibility, but I'm still seeing the Ryzen here. I'm seeing it's 10% off.
If you're going to only have the older versions.
Right.
And those are the ones that they were phasing out.
Mm-hmm.
And I've already stopped. That's 2 out of 4 models.
Right. This one's out of stock here, yeah.
This one looks like it's last units.
Mm-hmm.
Once these last units are gone,
next one, yeah. Mm-hmm. That is a very good point, because yes, the AI series is a completely different processor series. A very good question. I unfortunately do not have the answer, but I'm fairly certain that we should be able to get a clearer picture by asking those questions directed at the relevant people. To be honest, my personal take is that Framework is probably gonna push forward towards the newer processor series, just like they did with the Intel. I personally was looking, because you actually have the same with the Intel. I was recently very interested in getting a 12th gen Intel, because I used to have a 12th gen Intel that worked nicely until it crapped the bed, and then basically out of the blue it no longer worked, and I still wanted to, well, get a replacement, but the only things that you can get is now the Ultra series, and the Intel is, even as a replacement part, you don't really get the 12th gen. So I would argue this is probably also an economical decision, that they're only, shifting to the newest series eventually. And this is a very good question, how FreeBSD will be able to keep up, let's say. Because right now, the designated reference model is the AMD series, the 7040, I think it is, if I remember correctly. It's somewhere also on the GitHub page. Yes, I will take that question with me. And
Both open, and yes, I can confirm that the 7040 is listed as number 1.
Right. I remember the 16 model, I think, was on one of the candidates or something, but it was also only the AMD, if I remember correctly. All right. Thank you. Very, very good question. I will do my best to dig into that and see whether we can get an answer for that. I'm hopeful that we can. So Alice pointed out during her update that there is also been an update to the roadmap. That PDF has also been updated. So this is now for Q2 2025. Here we see actually, and I think this is better than the just regular clicking through the GitHub, because it nicely shows the various sequences and orders of things, where we can actually see that the Hibernate will only be started in Q3 after the various S2 and S0 work is completed. That will also include disk encryption on Hibernate. Wi-Fi is underway, will probably finish around between Q2 and Q3, but will continue with Wi-Fi 6 in Q3. Linux KPI ongoing, as we can see here, because again, this is going to continue as Wi-Fi continues, just as graphics will continue. And I think the continuation of graphics, I think here is also very important, because it's going to be exactly that work that will also allow us to eventually also move to the newer processor generations, which also I think eventually will include the AI generation. I'm not completely certain at which Linux kernel version the AI processors and graphics stack is going to work. But I think that is also something we should be able to figure out. I probably can ask around and hopefully produce an answer for that, so we get an understanding whether that is actually going to match that. Bluetooth is starting up in Q3 now, and audio is going to also reach into Q3. And the camera driver is code sharing, if I remember correctly. That is something that Li Wen is working on, that hopefully will also produce some results in Q3. And USB 4 and Thunderbolt work starting in Q3. So as we can see, there is many things we can expect from the second half of this year to produce very interesting and very helpful results. And yes, as we can see, we're now in a very weird spot, because unless you already bought an AMD 7040 series from Framework, at least for the moment, you might be straight out of luck. One thing that might be an option, actually I have not checked that, if you happen to already have a body, sometimes it might be an option, because that is, for example, what I did with my current AMD. I basically bought the parts on the marketplace. So I have not checked. Have you actually, may I ask, Matthias, I think it was, right? Matthias, have you also checked the marketplace, if you can get the items on the marketplace? Because sometimes that might be an option also.
Very sparse, I must say, and it's so not much luck now.
Okay, all right, got it. It's a bit of hit and miss, unfortunately, it appears at the moment. Yeah, I will take a look at that after the call. Maybe I will be able to give some additional input on that one after looking at that more closely. So this brings us to the conclusion in terms of the roadmap and the monthly updates for the laptop project from the foundation. Are there any questions or any particular points people want to make on what we have walked through here? Okay, if any question pops up, please feel free to interject, just as I said before. What I want to highlight, and I think, I mean, partially I mentioned that when we walked through it, but still I want to remind all of us, please, if you have a chance, please help Christos try out that review. And yes, it does take a bit of work, let's say, to get this working, because you have to compile your kernel and you have to, merge that and apply the patch. But Christos has written actually a very nicely compiled description and documentation on how to do this, that I think, if I remember correctly, he shared that on the desktop mailing list. Christos actually outlined very nicely here the various steps that are required to basically make this work on your existing system. And I think that, should lower the bar for many of us, to allow us to give additional feedback, because this really very much depends on feedback and diversity of hardware. And yes, it makes sense to test with the framework, but I would argue this also makes sense to test with other hardware. This requires virtual OSS to work. I understand that if that is going to go into base, then virtual OSS is probably also going to go into base to make this work, is what I read between the lines, let's say. All right. There is also additional input by Joe and the foundation to please test PKG base, which will eventually replace FreeBSD update. I think we all have our various experiences and shared pain points around FreeBSD update. Yes, it works nicely when it works, but it can also fail quite miserably and make things difficult. So PKG base is going to be a very, very nice improvement for system updates. Please help by trying it out. There is the roadmap. There is the update on the various work in progress areas. There is details in terms of what's the scope for the project. And there's also the call for action to please join the desktop mailing list. This is the place where the foundation and a lot of the communication is happening. One of the key points I think that is also relevant and worthwhile to point out, because the question comes up again and again, the GitHub by the foundation is read-only. And yes, very often one might want to make a point or point out that something might be missing, or that something might, gain additional value by doing something additionally. Let's say there is conversations going on the mailing list. These are also linked on the GitHub, if I remember correctly, and I will be happy to share that also after the call through the mailing list. This mailing list is basically meant as the instrument to also get in touch with Alice and also with the people on the project, to give and share your feedback, share your insights, share your questions, as well as this call, obviously. Even though today, admittedly, a lot of people are missing from the call, but this call is also meant to raise those questions, bring those inputs, and help with the conversation, basically. All right, unless there are any questions in terms of the Foundations project, we would then move over to the various areas of interest. And with that, I would like to bring a quick reminder. I mentioned this previously, and this basically ties in to Björn's work, I think, quite strongly. All this new work is now finally available in 14.3. 14.3 has been released just, I think, this week, if I'm not mistaken. Looking forward to upgrade myself. And please remember to run fwget before you upgrade, because this will ensure that you have the most recent firmware. Because, as Björn also announced on various mailing lists, including this call and I think other channels, the firmware is no longer in base. We probably all agree it makes sense to move that outside, to have the update cycle happen more consistently in terms of the firmware, independent of the base system. So please run that before you upgrade, to save yourself or ourselves from the pains that might happen through drop-in connection, because, for example, with the framework 13, if you have one like this, and unless you have a dongle for a wired connection, you would then actually get disconnected if you don't have that, if you don't have the recent firmware. And I want to point out a very, very good question also that was raised on the mailing list. Unfortunately, I don't have that answer at the moment. I have suspicion that I want to share, and I've raised the question with a few people. I know I will have to share that question with a bunch of other people as well, in particular with those people involved with the graphics work with DRM mod. I partially joined that work probably 1 or 2 years ago, so I have some degree of understanding what is going on, but I'm not claiming any kind of expertise there. From what I remember from taking a look at, in particular, the VT code that is closely related to what is happening with the DRM mod, my understanding is that multi-GPU support is not gonna be something that's just gonna work, by a flick of a switch, basically. I understand basically the question that was posed on the mailing list. Sorry, I should have started with that. I should have led with that. The question was, if we have multiple GPUs, like, for example, the Framework 16 notebook has that, where you have an integrated graphics chip and then a dedicated graphics chip, can we switch back and forth between those two seamlessly like you can, for example, on Linux? And as it stands right now, obviously, as I think he mentioned, I forgot his name, unfortunately, I admit. I apologize for that. He mentioned he tried it, I think, and it didn't work. It fell over. And I remember having that conversation also, I think 2 years back, that switching back and forth between those graphics devices is simply not working at the moment. And I want to point out, because one of the questions was, well, the Framework 16 has a configuration like that. Shouldn't that be part of the scope of this project? And I think it's a very good question. And as I said, I forwarded that question to our colleagues at the foundation. However, my expectation is that for the moment, this is not going to be in the scope because of the fact that, as I said before, the 16 is a candidate but not a designated reference model for the scoping. So yes, there might be a chance to bring it into scope, but my suspicion is that at the moment it is very likely not in scope because of the fact that this is not going to be easy, which is not to say that it isn't worthwhile, I should point out. Right, with that, I want to remind all of us that there is a worksheet that is available to all of us. It's linked on the wiki page. So the idea is to collect the various items of interest that we have for desktop and laptop usage for FreeBSD. If you have something that you want to raise awareness about, where you have work that you want people to test or want to support the work, please feel free to put your name in there, put your work in there. And obviously, I invite all of us to use these calls also to bring updates and ask or bring calls for actions, which I think is the perfect space to do exactly that. And this is one of the reasons why basically at the moment we have continuous progress here with the FreeBSD Foundations project. There is definitely also some progress around documentation, where Alexander has been doing a whole lot of work. There is some trial and experimental work from myself in terms of the screen driver that I've been doing for Terminal, and there is no right or wrong. So if you have something, or if you're interested in working on something, please feel free to add your name. If you have something that already started or interested in starting and want to, find people to join the effort, please feel free to use the opportunity to add your names. And this is also, I think, a nice connection back to the points that I wanted to make with the Enterprise Working Group. We started this call with a collection of many, many points, as you can see here. And one of the weaknesses is generally in any open source project, there's always more scope than available people to do the work. And we are working on some, let's say, procedures that will hopefully allow us to compress this and archive things into a spot where we have a manageable collection of points that actually do see progress, because I think it, for everyone involved, for a 1 hour call, it is no fun to walk through this worksheet. And every call we just have the agreement, well, there is no progress because there is nobody working on this at the moment. So this makes no sense. We want to shorten that, and we want to focus on those points where we can and will have an impact in terms of deliverables and value being generated for the community. With that, let me ask around, is there anybody who wants to share anything, ask questions, bring something, and any people working on anything that needs support or any calls for actions that you want to bring? There you go. Please, Austin, go ahead. Yes, now it's working. There you go.
Sorry, I thought I was setting the mic thing. Yeah, so I guess there's some background.
Any takers? Otherwise, I can say what little I know about it. I know for a fact that Dumbbell, I think he probably even was the last one to touch VT about the frame buffer integration with your MKMod, and I do remember that particular piece of code it's not a lot of code, but it is incredibly important, and I can kind of imagine the pain that you're going through. I suppose Dumbbell is probably a very good person to turn to and ask for help with that. And I suppose, I will be happy to shoot him an email because I think he's also involved with the graphics works anyways. I'm uncertain whether he will be immediately able to help you with the work, but I'm fairly certain that he's also got NVIDIA cards to work with. The majority of Foundation people will also watch the recording and then hear the question, and there's a good chance that they will get back to you. I'm hoping. All right. Any other questions? All right. Then I think... Sure, go ahead.
Item code, so line 27, the code repository to share content and code. Do we have a target hosting the infrastructure? Do we need to get one? What's the status of that?
To be honest, I think right now, at the moment, we don't really have a conclusive agreement or owner at that point. One of the key points that people were making, I think that actually came up during the survey around the various items that people felt are important for the laptop and desktop workspace for FreeBSD, is that there is a bunch of work happening on GitHub, but people felt, let's say, queasy with what is going on around GitHub, with the artificial intelligence and who really owns the code on there. And so the question was raised, okay, what is the alternative? Where should we go? Is there any chance to find a spot that we can all agree on? Okay, we put our work there. And my understanding is, at least, from the FreeBSD project perspective at the moment, well, the code is on GitHub. Yes, there's also a separate source control server, but at the end of the day, there is a repo on GitHub that is, official, let's say, and I don't see that moving elsewhere anytime soon, at least. But when it comes to other work, I suspect it's up to anybody to, attempt to rally the community around another platform. Here, for example, Thomas made the suggestion for Gijo. There's also Codeberg and then others, if I remember correctly. So there is no clear answer at the moment, I would suspect. But again, I should probably underline, if anybody feels interested in that topic and feels there is value in rallying the the community around a particular repository or repository system, then please, I mean, feel free to pick it up and, you know, make suggestions. There's the mailing list, there's this call, there's many places to start rallying people around that work, whatever it takes. It's not for the lack of ideas, let's say. It is very much about...
The problem, right? That it's more about getting critical mass than just adding...
Exactly. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I would argue, I mean, critical mass is a very good point that you're making. I mean, everything starts with, okay, we need a system where we can, you know, start something and then, you know, collect things into that particular point, into this focal point, which eventually will start generating value. And the more value it generates, the more people will be drawn to that. So yes, it will take work by a handful of people probably to get something like that started. Possibly even funding, because again, unless we take some platform that already exists, it will take service-based resources and so on and so forth. So it's not completely easy, but it's not impossible either, I would argue. And this is many points on this list. Thank you. Well, with that, we are basically at the end already, and I think reasonably in time. Our next call is going to be on July 9th. We will continue this usual schedule. It's going to be the second Wednesday in July. It will stay with 5 p.m. UTC. If you have something, bring it to the worksheet. Keep track of what's going on for the Foundations project. I think that there's a lot of things happening, really great work. Please join the various mailing lists. There's one for wireless, there's one for audio, there's one for desktop. I think these three are particularly useful and interesting for this Laptop and Desktop Workgroup. There is one for the Enterprise Working Group. I want to point out this is also very interesting. And, well, the Hackers is famous, I would say, but very technical. But many mailing lists out there that we can definitely recommend to keep track of. And with that, thank you very much. Again, I will post the video on YouTube. I will share the link on the mailing list. I will be writing minutes and I will be sharing the slides also on the mailing list and everything. Quick reminder for those of us who do not know or have forgotten, there is a wiki page that holds all the relevant information, including the Laptop and Desktop Workgroup call. We have here under active projects, we have the Laptop Desktop Working Group call, and basically all the calls, all the recordings, all the old slides and everything is here. And this is a very good reminder for myself. Today, I will finally again properly copy out the chat log. This will also be documented for eternity's sake. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Thank you very much.